Breakfast Club just committed career suicide on live radio, and Claressa Shields is the reason the building is on fire. What you are about to hear is the most reckless cape job in modern hip-hop media history, and by the time we get to the Ariel Helwani twist at the end, you are going to understand why Claressa Shields is finished. Not slowing down. Not slipping. Finished. Cooked. Wrapped. Signed, sealed, and stamped by her own hand. And nobody, not one soul in that legacy radio building, has the courage to say it out loud. So I am going to say it. Loud. Clear. On the record. Because when the smoke clears from this whole mess, only one side is going to be standing on the correct page of the record book. And it is not the side wearing the Breakfast Club microphones. Not even close. Let me set the table for you, family. Because this story has more moving pieces than a chessboard on fire in the middle of a hurricane. Claressa Shields is training in Atlanta for a fight on August 15th against a woman named Kay Scott. And if you have never heard of Kay Scott, congratulations, you are not alone because nobody has. Not the boxing purists. Not the casual fans. Not the boxing writers. Not one gym rat I have talked to in the last 2 months. Kay Scott is a model with a handful of fights on her ledger, and she was picked as the opponent for a woman who calls herself the greatest of all time. Take that in for a second. The self-proclaimed GWAT is fighting a model on August 15th in Atlanta, and instead of talking about the fight, instead of promoting the fight, instead of doing the actual job that boxing champions are supposed to do, Claressa Shields has spent the last month starting fights with radio hosts, posting fake pregnancy photos generated by artificial intelligence, and dragging a married man named Papoose into every conversation she can find a microphone for. Every single microphone. Every single podcast. Every single radio segment. Claressa Shields cannot resist bringing Papoose into the story, and then Claressa Shields wants to be shocked when Papoose becomes the story. And then, out of nowhere, the Breakfast Club decided to run cover for her. On live radio, in front of the whole world. Charlamagne, DJ Envy, Jess Hilarious, all three of them sitting in that studio pretending they did not see what everybody with two eyes saw. Pretending that a boxer calling a radio host Miss Piggy is somehow not disqualifying. Pretending that a woman bragging about dating another woman's husband is somehow a private matter that a public radio show has no right to ask about. Pretending that a viral confrontation from an interview conducted by their own colleague, Shanika, is somehow a professional foul on Shanika and not on the boxer who lost her composure on tape. That is not a hot take. That is not a spicy opinion. That is a coordinated defense of the indefensible, and it happened on the biggest morning radio platform in Black America. That is not journalism. That is not radio. That is bodyguard work. That is a professional couch turning into a professional shield, and I am here to explain, sentence by sentence, exactly how the Breakfast Club got caught red-handed. And I am going to name every name that needs naming, starting with the biggest one on the marquee. Claressa Shields. Because Claressa Shields is the center of gravity in this entire storm, and Claressa Shields is the person who caused every single wave that is now hitting the beach. When Shanika, the radio host in the middle of the viral clip, asked Claressa Shields a very simple question about her relationship with Papoose, a man who is legally still married to another woman, Claressa Shields did not answer like a mature athlete. Claressa Shields did not answer like a champion. Claressa Shields did not even answer like a professional adult with basic media training. Claressa Shields snapped. Claressa Shields called Shanika Miss Piggy. Claressa Shields body-shamed a woman on live radio on camera in front of the entire internet, and then Claressa Shields tried to sell the world a version of the story where Shanika was the one being distasteful. Do you hear what I just said to you? Claressa Shields, a professional boxer, called another black woman a fat pig on a radio program, and then accused the radio host of being unprofessional for asking a fair question. That is the level of delusion we are dealing with. That is the level of arrogance we are dealing with. And the Breakfast Club, the same Breakfast Club that has interviewed Claressa Shields more times than I can count on both hands, decided the correct response was to sit at their little morning table and defend the champion who had just committed a public relations arson on their own colleague. Not question her. Not push back. Not even ask a polite follow-up. Just defend. Just cape. Just cover. Charlamagne opened his mouth first, and Charlamagne said, and I quote him in spirit, that he enjoyed the interview and thought Claressa Shields gave a great answer to Shanika's question. A great answer. A great answer. Family, let me ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself. Since when is calling a woman Miss Piggy a great answer? Since when is stuttering through a sentence about how, if you call him her husband, you should call her his wife a great answer? That is not an answer. That is a word salad tossed in a blender by somebody who got caught with her hand in the cookie jar. That is a scrambled sentence delivered by a person who has never once, not in a single interview she has ever done, sat down and calmly explained why she is walking around with a woman's legal husband on her arm. Not once. Not on Ebro. Not on Big Boy. Not on any podcast. Not on any radio show. Not on any late-night couch. Never. And Charlamagne, the same Charlamagne who built his entire brand on holding guests accountable, the same Charlamagne who has made 20-year-old rappers cry on his couch by asking the tough follow-up, the same Charlamagne who has publicly humiliated politicians, athletes, and executives for lesser offenses, sat there and called that word salad a great answer. That is not accountability journalism. That is a paid endorsement. That is a favor being called in. That is somebody in that building making sure the champion does not get her feelings hurt on the way out the door. Charlamagne, when the smoke clears, that is going to be one of the ugliest moments of your on-air career, and history is going to remember it exactly the way I am describing it right now. Not the way you spin it later. Not the way your PR team cleans it up. The way it happened. On tape. In front of everybody. DJ Envy was even worse. DJ Envy, who has never been the sharpest microphone at the table but usually knows when to stay quiet, opened his mouth and said he was upset that nobody was talking about the fight. Envy is upset that the conversation is not about the fight. Envy is upset that Claressa Shields is being asked about her personal life. Envy, my man, let me help you understand something very simple. Nobody is talking about the fight because there is no fight to talk about. K. Scott is not a top 10 fighter. K. Scott is not a top 20 fighter. K. Scott is a name that was slotted into a pay-per-view slot because the actual A-list opponents either turned Claressa Shields down or priced themselves out of the room. When Claressa Shields fought Savannah Marshall, people talked about the fight. When Claressa Shields was chasing Layla Ali, people talked about the fight. When Claressa Shields was hinting at a bout with Chris Cyborg or Hannah Gabriels or Michaela Mayer, people talked about the fight. Nobody is talking about K. Scott because nobody knows who K. Scott is, and nobody is talking about the fight because the fight is a placeholder on the way to whatever check Claressa Shields is trying to cash next. That is not on Shanika. That is not on the media. That is on Claressa Shields for picking an opponent nobody wanted, and then filling the promotional runway with personal drama loud enough to drown out the fact that the main event is a mystery box matchup. Envy, do the math. It is not that hard. And then Jess Hilarious, the one voice on that couch who actually kept it a little bit real, said the thing everybody in the building was thinking. Jess said, we have heard more about Claressa Shields' other fights than we have heard about this one. Jess said the drama is overpowering the fight. Jess said, in her own words, that the whole Papoose situation has been drowning out Claressa Shields' career for the last 2 years. And Jess is right. Jess is standing on the correct side of the ledger. Jess is the only one on that couch who is going to walk out of this segment with her credibility intact, because Jess said the quiet part out loud while Charlamagne and Envy were busy playing bodyguard for Claressa Shields. Salute to Jess. One clean sentence out of the entire studio, and it came from the co-host with the least to lose. Read into that whatever you want. But here is where the story gets vicious, family. Here is where the mask really slips off. Because when Charlamagne tried to soften the criticism by saying that Shanika should have said her follow-up comments to Claressa Shields' face on the air, in the studio, in the moment, Charlamagne revealed exactly how little he understands about how a media scrum actually works. And I know how a media scrum works. I have been in media scrums. I have interviewed boxers. I have interviewed champions. I have sat in a room with 3 microphones pointed at the same guest and had to figure out how to squeeze one clean question in without making the whole conversation about myself. So let me walk you through, step by step, why Charlamagne is talking about a business he does not understand. When you are in a group interview, when you are one of 3 or 4 voices in the room, you do not get to make the whole segment about your own personal feelings toward the guest. You get one strong question. You fire that question. You let the guest respond. And then you pass the mic. Because if you sit there and go back and forth with the guest, If you turn the interview into a private argument between you and Claressa Shields, you have just hijacked the entire show. You have just made the segment about you. You have just cheated the other two hosts, Shadi and Young Jock, out of their own airtime. That is not what a professional interviewer does. That is not what Shanika did. Shanika asked the question, Claressa Shields flew off the handle, Shanika kept her composure, and Shanika saved her deeper reflection for the sit-down interviews she did with other outlets afterward, where the whole segment could be about her. That is how the profession works. That is media literacy 101. And Charlamagne knows this. Charlamagne pretends not to know this because pretending not to know this is what running cover looks like. Do not insult the audience, Charlamagne. We watch interviews for a living. We know the difference. And let me highlight another thing everybody in the Breakfast Club studio managed to skip past, because this is the piece of the puzzle that changes the whole picture. Shanika, when she was doing those follow-up interviews, said something that most people missed. She said that as a woman who had been through her own hard chapters, she was trying to have a woman-to-woman conversation with a 31-year-old mature athlete. She said she was reading the room, trying to feel Claressa Shields out. She said she thought she could ask a grown woman question. Read that back to yourself. That is not an ambush. That is not a hit piece. That is a professional interviewer offering the guest an off-ramp. And Claressa Shields did not take the off-ramp. Claressa Shields floored the gas pedal in the opposite direction, called Shanika a pig, and then tried to run to social media to spin the story into a heroic rant. That is not champion behavior. That is not adult behavior. That is the behavior of a person who knows the answer to the question is embarrassing and cannot find the emotional maturity to say it out loud. Claressa Shields did that. Claressa Shields chose that. Claressa Shields will not unchoose it. Now let me talk about the elephant in the room that Charlamagne and Envy will not touch with a 10-foot pole, because this is the part of the story where the wheels really come off. Claressa Shields is dating a man who is legally married to another woman. That is not gossip. That is not tabloid speculation. That is a public, documented, on-the-record fact. Papoose is legally still married to Remy Ma. The divorce has not been finalized. The paperwork has not been signed. In the eyes of the law, in the eyes of the state, in the eyes of every ledger that matters, Papoose is a married man. And Claressa Shields, the self-proclaimed greatest of all time, is walking around with him, parading him around, bringing him to her promotional appearances, letting him rap songs for her at press events, and then getting on radio and telling the world that anybody who calls him a married man is being distasteful. Claressa Shields, that is what a married man is called. That is the word for what he is. Legally, publicly, on paper. There is no interpretation. There is no reframing. There is no clever word salad that changes the fact that Papoose is still, at this hour, on this date, a married man. Not separated by choice. Not divorced by paperwork. Married. Period. Full stop. And it gets worse. Because before Claressa Shields was publicly parading Papoose, Claressa Shields was in Remy Ma's direct messages, according to Remy Ma herself. Claressa Shields was in Remy Ma's inbox getting fashion tips, acting like a friend, acting like a supporter, and then Claressa Shields pivoted and started dating Remy Ma's legal husband. Remy Ma leaked those messages. Remy Ma showed the world exactly what kind of quiet betrayal was happening behind the scenes. And you would think if you were the Breakfast Club, if you were Charlamagne, if you were DJ Envy, that maybe, just maybe, that context would come up in the segment. You would think that at some point, one of the three hosts would say the words married man or legal wife or inbox betrayal. But no, not one of them, not one single mention, not one syllable. That is not an oversight. That is a strategy. That is a deliberate, calculated omission, and every one of us watching noticed it. And here is where I have to remind everybody watching, because this is the part of the story that too many of the other channels are afraid to say out loud. The Breakfast Club has interviewed Claressa Shields multiple times. They sat in that studio and they let her talk. They laughed at her jokes. They fed her the softball questions. They never once, in any of those sit-downs, asked her the hard question about Papoose. They never once pressed her about being in Remy Ma's inbox. They never once asked her to explain why a legally married man is walking around in her promotional runway. Never. Not one time. And now the same Breakfast Club is critiquing Shanika's question technique. Now the same Breakfast Club is saying Shanika should have followed up harder. Now the same Breakfast Club is playing armchair quarterback about the interview they were too scared to conduct themselves. That is bench players talking about the starting five. You do not get to sit courtside for 2 years, then run on the court once the buzzer sounds, and claim you would have hit the game winner. You had your shot. You did not take it. Shanika took it. And Shanika made the shot. Sit down. And if you think I am being harsh on the Breakfast Club, let me remind you what Charlamagne said in a previous segment about Shanika. Charlamagne said on his own show that he has known Shanika since the Wendy Williams era. Charlamagne said he considers Shanika a strong radio personality. Charlamagne called her a friend. And in the segment where he was supposed to defend that friend from a body-shaming attack on national platforms, Charlamagne could not muster a single sentence of pushback against Claressa Shields. Not one. Not the Miss Piggy line was over the line. Not we do not body-shame black women on this show. Not as a friend of Shanika, I have to say Claressa was wrong here. Nothing. Silence. A shield up. A wall. A calculated professional courtesy that only ever gets extended to guests the Breakfast Club is afraid to lose. That is not friendship. That is bodyguarding. And Shanika, if you are listening to this right now, take note of who really has your back and who was pretending to have your back. Now let us pivot to the funny part, because Claressa Shields has provided us with plenty of comedy in the last few weeks, and I would be doing you a disservice if I did not walk you through it. Claressa Shields has been posting artificial intelligence-generated pregnancy photos to her social media. Fake photos, fabricated images, digitally invented pictures of herself pregnant, holding a fake baby bump, staring lovingly into the camera. Let me repeat that so it lands. A professional champion boxer who claims to be the greatest of all time is using AI to generate fake pregnancy content and posting it to her feed as if it is real. Family, that is not the behavior of a serious athlete. That is not the behavior of a person promoting a major pay-per-view. That is the behavior of somebody who has completely lost the plot. Somebody who has confused attention with legacy. Somebody who has confused being in the timeline with being on the ledger. And every promoter, every sponsor, every real boxing exec watching that content is quietly closing the checkbook. Trust me on that. And then there is the Barbie doll. Claressa Shields has been posting a black Barbie doll to her feed with the implication that this doll is a representation of herself and family. I have to tell you, the doll looks nothing like her. Nothing. The doll has features that do not match her features. The doll has a face that does not match her face. The doll is a fantasy version of what Claressa Shields wishes she looked like, and Claressa Shields is posting it to taunt the people who have been comparing her to Shanika and to other black women online. That is not confidence. That is not clapping back. That is a person losing a public argument and reaching for a plastic prop to win it. The doll is not the flex, Claressa. The doll is the tell. And then, and this is the part that made me put my head in my hands, Claressa Shields tried to promote the fact that the rapper Latto is going to walk her out to the ring for the K. Scott fight. She made a flyer, for the ring walk. Let me ask you something, and I want you to think really hard before you answer. When in the history of boxing has any real fighter needed a flyer to promote who is walking them out to the ring? Adrian Broner had legendary ring walks. Adrian Broner had Kendrick Lamar and 50 Cent walking him out. Nobody made a flyer for it. Gervonta Davis has had massive ring walks. Nobody printed a flyer for it. Deontay Wilder walked out to a live performance. Nobody made a flyer. But Claressa Shields, because her tickets are not moving, because her pay-per-view numbers are soft, because her whole promotional runway is a smoke show, had to sit down and make a promotional flyer for who is walking her out to the ring. And even then, Latto, who is currently having her own career slump, does not have the star wattage to pull the numbers Claressa Shields needs. That whole flyer is a monument to how bad the ticket sales are. That whole flyer is a receipt. That whole flyer is the promotional equivalent of a going out of business sign. And Claressa Shields tried to drop the Latto announcement in the same news cycle where Remy Ma was going viral for a moment at the Angie Martinez barbecue. That is not a coincidence. That is a scene steal. Claressa Shields saw Remy Ma trending, saw the barbecue clip pulling numbers, and immediately tried to drop her own news to pull the spotlight back to herself. That is not champion energy. That is not GWOAT energy. That is desperate influencer energy. That is the energy of a person who is watching the timeline pass her by and grabbing at whatever headline she can steal. And the timeline noticed. The blogs noticed. The audience noticed. Everybody noticed except, apparently, the Breakfast Club. And then we come to the biggest piece of the puzzle, the piece that nobody, and I mean nobody on the Breakfast Club had the courage to touch. Charlamagne, when the last big Claressa Shields controversy hit, had a chance to speak up. When the veteran combat sports journalist Ariel Helwani sat down with Claressa Shields and asked her about Remy Ma, Claressa Shields did not call Ariel Helwani a pig. Claressa Shields did not body shame Ariel Helwani. Claressa Shields did not go on a viral rant against Ariel Helwani. Claressa Shields sat there, quiet, composed, answering carefully, because Claressa Shields understood, in that moment, that Ariel Helwani is a Jewish male journalist with a global platform, and dragging him the way she drags black women online would carry real consequences. Consequences she is not willing to face. Consequences her career cannot absorb. So Claressa Shields chose silence. Claressa Shields chose composure. Claressa Shields chose to be professional. Just that one time. With just that one journalist. When it was strategically convenient. But when a black woman on urban radio asks her a fair question about her personal life, all of a sudden Claressa Shields is ready to swing. All of a sudden Claressa Shields is ready to body shame. All of a sudden Claressa Shields is ready to call names, insult appearances, and rant on social media. That is not accountability. That is selective bullying. That is a person who has calibrated exactly who she thinks she can attack and who she thinks she cannot. And once you see that pattern, once you notice it, you cannot unsee it. It is the pattern that defines Claressa Shields' entire public persona in this current chapter of her career. And it is the pattern that the Breakfast Club is now caping for. Say it with me. Selective. Bullying. 2 words. Write them on the ledger. Let me put it to you plainly, family. If you open a restaurant and the food at your restaurant is average, and while you are running the restaurant you also happen to be waving a firearm on the highway on the evening news, and you are being investigated by the health department, and there is a viral clip of a chair fight in your dining room, and a food inspector is walking through the kitchen finding roaches, do you get to hold a press conference and ask why nobody is talking about the food? Do you get to point at the camera and say, why is nobody focused on my menu? No, you do not. The food is not the story because you made sure the food was not the story. You filled the news cycle with drama loud enough to drown the menu. That is Claressa Shields with this K. Scott fight. She has drowned the fight. She has drowned the promotion. She has drowned the entire boxing conversation with a personal life freak show so loud that nobody has room in their timeline for the actual sport she is supposed to be selling. And when the Breakfast Club sits there and says, we are trying to promote the fight, we are the ones talking about the fight. Family, please, please. Charlamagne mentioned the fight date in passing once, in between 2 blocks of defending Claressa Shields' personal decisions. That is not fight promotion. That is a courtesy plug. That is a professional wink. And every real boxing writer, every real combat sports journalist, every real fight fan watching that segment knew exactly what was happening. We have eyes. We have ears. We have receipts. Now let me address the part of the segment that actually made me raise my eyebrows because Claressa Shields on air gave relationship advice. Relationship advice from Claressa Shields. Family, let me be careful here because I want to be fair to everybody. Claressa Shields, in her romantic history, has been through failed engagements, has had multiple public relationships end in flames, has never been married, and is currently dating a legally married man. That is the resume. That is the credential ledger she is bringing to the relationship advice podium. And on that podium, Claressa Shields told the rapper Chrisean Rock to stay away from Blueface. Now, whether that is good advice or bad advice is a completely separate conversation. The advice might, in a vacuum, be right. The problem is not the advice. The problem is the source. Getting relationship advice from Claressa Shields, in this current chapter of her career, is like getting a legal opinion from a defendant awaiting sentencing. The information may be technically correct, but the source disqualifies itself. And the Breakfast Club, instead of noticing this obvious credential mismatch, cheered her on. Charlamagne actually said he was glad Chrisian Rock is training with Claressa Shields because a professional is teaching her. A professional at what, Charlamagne? A professional at picking married men out of a lineup? Because the actual boxing accomplishments Claressa Shields has earned are real. I will give her that. But the personal conduct receipt she is currently signing does not make her a mentor to another young woman in a chaotic relationship. It makes her a walking case study. It makes her a warning label. It makes her the exact opposite of the mentor Chrisian Rock actually needs. And that, family, is the whole story. The Breakfast Club got caught. Not once. Not twice. 3 separate times in one segment. They got caught defending body shaming. They got caught rewriting the timeline of the Shanika viral clip. They got caught praising a champion who is walking around with somebody else's husband and calling anybody who mentions it distasteful. Charlamagne got caught pretending he does not understand how a media scrum works. Envy got caught complaining that the fight is not the story when Claressa Shields herself is the one who made sure it would not be. Only Jess Hilarious got out of that segment with her credibility intact, and she got out of it barely, by saying one honest sentence at the very end. One sentence. That is what saved her. And in the meantime, the independent voices, the YouTubers, the boxing bloggers, the small channels that are actually doing the work of covering this sport, are the ones telling the truth. That is not a coincidence. That is a media shift happening in real time. The legacy radio building has too many favors owed to too many guests. The morning couch has too many advertising deals in the pipeline. The corporate suit will not let the hosts ask the hard question because the hard question might cost the booking. So the hard question falls to us. The independents. The bloggers. The small channels. The ones who do not have a Netflix deal to protect. The ones who cannot be bought because there is nobody buying us. And that is exactly why Claressa Shields hates us. Because we are the last mirror she cannot smash. And that is why, when this whole story is written down in the record book, when the smoke clears and the ledger closes, the correct side of the page is going to have my name and the names of the other independent voices on it. Not The Breakfast Club. Not Charlamagne. Not DJ Envy. And, unless something changes very fast, not Claressa Shields either. Because Claressa Shields is on the wrong page. Claressa Shields is watching her endorsement deals dry up. Claressa Shields is watching her interview requests shrink. Claressa Shields is watching the questions get harder and the audience get tougher. And Claressa Shields still, at this hour, cannot bring herself to sit down and answer one simple, direct, adult question about the married man walking beside her. You want to know how I know Claressa Shields is finished? Because a real champion, a real GWAT, would have answered the question on the first take. A real champion would have said, here is the truth of my situation. Here is where I stand. Here is why I am comfortable with my choices. A real champion would not have reached for the body-shaming shovel. A real champion would not have posted AI pregnancy photos. A real champion would not have made a ringwalk flyer to pump ticket sales. A real champion would not have gone quiet in front of Ariel Helwani and loud in front of Shanika. A real champion family would have carried the weight without cracking. And Claressa Shields has been cracking, loudly, publicly, on camera, for months. This is not a snapshot. This is a trend line. This is a downward slope with receipts stacked at every mile marker. So here is what I want you to do, family, if you have made it this far into the breakdown. I want you to think about who you trust in this ecosystem. I want you to think about which voices told you the truth about this Claressa Shields story from day one, and which voices are only now, months late, trying to spin it into something more palatable. I want you to think about which morning shows are protecting champions and which independent creators are protecting the audience. And I want you to think really hard about who is going to be standing on the correct side of the ledger when this whole thing lands. Because it is going to land, family. This is not the kind of story that just fades. This is the kind of story that snowballs. This is the kind of story where every week, another shoe drops, another AI pregnancy photo, another leaked message, another walked-back interview, another cape job by another radio show trying to save a friend. And every time it happens, the receipts get louder. Every time it happens, the ledger gets thicker. Every time it happens, the independent voices get more credibility, and the legacy morning couches get more expensive to sit on. August 15th is coming. Atlanta is coming. Scott is coming, whether anybody knows her name or not. And when Claressa Shields walks to that ring, whether Latto is on the flyer or not, whether the ringwalk is spectacular or not, whether the pay-per-view numbers come in strong or come in soft, the story of this whole promotional run is not going to be the fight. It is not going to be the punches thrown. It is not going to be the belts on the line. The story is going to be the Miss Piggy line. The story is going to be the AI pregnancy photos. The story is going to be the flyer. The story is going to be Charlamagne caping. The story is going to be Envy pretending the drama does not exist. The story is going to be Jess Hilarious being the only one on that couch with a spine. The story is going to be Shanika standing tall, credibility intact, having asked the one question everybody else in the media was too scared to ask. And the story is going to be all of us, family. All of us who watched it happen in real time. All of us who saw the cape job for what it was. All of us who noticed that Claressa Shields backs down from Ariel Helwani and swings at black women. All of us who kept the ledger open when the legacy media tried to close it. Every subscriber, every commenter, every share, every clip, every repost. We are the record now, not the morning couch. I am telling you right now on the record in this recording that history is going to prove every single one of us right. And when it does, when the smoke clears and the timeline settles, I want you to remember where you heard it first. Not on the morning couch. Not on the Netflix deal. Not on the paid endorsement. Here. Right here. In this breakdown. With the ledger open and the receipts on the table. Now let me leave you with one more thought before we close this out, because this is the piece that nobody is going to say out loud but somebody has to. If Claressa Shields wanted to change the trajectory of this story, if Claressa Shields wanted to write a different final chapter, she could do it tomorrow. One clean interview. One honest answer. One moment of adult accountability. Sit down with a serious journalist, look into the camera, and say, "Here is my truth. This is my life. These are the choices I have made. I stand behind them. That is it. That is the entire fix. That is the whole reset." But Claressa Shields will not do it. Claressa Shields cannot do it. And every day that goes by without that clean interview, the story gets a little louder, the receipts get a little heavier, and the ledger gets a little more permanent. That is not a threat. That is math. That is media physics. That is how public perception hardens into permanent legacy. So on August 15th, when the lights come up in Atlanta and the ring announcer starts the introductions and Latto or somebody like her walks Claressa Shields to the ropes, I want you to remember this breakdown. I want you to remember every receipt we walked through. I want you to remember the media scrum lesson. I want you to remember the Ariel Helwani silence. I want you to remember the flyer. I want you to remember the AI pregnancy photos. And I want you to remember that the Breakfast Club, on the biggest test of their journalistic careers in the last 12 months, chose to run cover instead of run the story. They chose the guest over the audience. They chose the booking over the truth. They chose the paycheck over the profession. Because that is the whole game, family. Cover or story. Shield or truth. Cape or ledger. Every media outlet in every generation eventually has to pick which side they are on. And the Breakfast Club just picked. Loudly. On tape. In front of everybody. And when the smoke clears, they are going to have to live with it. Every one of them. Charlamagne. Envy. The producers. The bookers. All of them. Written down. Timestamped. Archived. Permanent. I am ego. This has been the receipts. Drop a comment and tell me who you think is on the correct page of this ledger. Tell me if you think Claressa Shields still has a chance to walk this back. Tell me if you think Charlamagne owes Shanika an on-air apology. Tell me if the Scott fight is going to hit the pay-per-view numbers or crash the promotion. And if you want the next breakdown, the deeper dive, the follow-up receipts on the Papoose divorce paperwork and the Remy Ma inbox timeline, stay tuned. That one is coming next, and it is going to be even bigger than this one. Correct side of the ledger. Every single time. And Claressa Shields, if this breakdown ever finds your camp, understand one thing before you start typing a rebuttal. We are not the enemy. We are the mirror. And the day you stop swinging at the mirror is the day the story finally changes. Until then, we keep the receipts. We keep the ledger. We keep the record. See you at the next round, family.